I like to call them Jenga families, where the people have all of the things that I've talked about, the 5,000 square foot house, the BMW, they have the country club membership, and it looks like they're on top of the world. But one person is the earner and like the other person is the stay-at-home parent. And think of it like the game of Jenga. If one block is removed, i.e. a job loss or something, drastic, the whole thing comes crashing down. And I think I know way too many people like that. And for me, I've always tried to balance like, hey, I want to maximize my earning years, but in order for this to really work, I have to be smart with my money, right? And I think a lot of times people tend to go for the gusto because I've made it, I make all this money, I have this fancy title. People expect me to keep up. So it's something where you have to have that windfall because Armageddon at some point will come, right? And I've talked to people about this. I've talked to like a lot of former Wall Street brokers who worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Those really smart ones, Mo, planned for Armageddon. They knew that it would come to an end. So the ones who, had the same house for 30 years and didn't belong to the country club and drove the Chevy Impala were the ones that were ready for retirement. It was the ones that spent more than they made, that when Armageddon happened, it was the end of the world.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. Today, I have with me Nick Passarelli, who is a friend that I made on LinkedIn, believe it or not. So something good can come out of social media, kids, okay? And Nick, he is an executive in the fintech industry and has been in HR and is somebody who basically saw the ageism writing on the wall from an early part of his career and has become passionate about advocating about how it's wrong. So thank you for joining me. I'm really happy you're here.
I am thrilled to be on the show. Thank you so much.
Yay. Okay. So bring us back to the beginning because your career has been varied. I mean, it's like you got a little crypto, you got a little Wall Street, your tech. No, so bring us back to the beginning and how you got into your career and what kind of happened from there.
I don't like to admit this openly, but I first started in human resources. And I know that HR kind of gets a bad rap. And look, I know a lot of great HR people, including the ones at my company who are fantastic. But I started in HR back in 96, and I was working for a Big Four consulting firm and was working on a lot of cool projects. And then in 1999, we started having conversations about mass layoffs. And if you remember, Mo, there was Y2K talk, when December 31st, 1999 comes around, the end of the world is coming. We have to move our forces differently. We have to shift into this and shift into that. So the decision was made by the leadership at the time that they were going to do massive cuts. So what I was tasked to do along with my team members was to go around to different cities and literally have termination meetings every day for about a month straight. So
you were George Clooney from Up in the Air.
That's exactly
Oh my gosh, brutal.
So I remember, and I'll never forget, the first termination meeting that I had was in Boston, and they literally had them in 15-minute increments. And it was so impersonal, where it was like an assembly line and people knew what was going on, right? And what ended up happening was I met with a woman who had just, gotten out of school. It was her first job. She was so excited to be there. And here she is 18 months after starting, being told that she no longer has a job. And I remember she met with the partner and she kept a straight face. And then I was there to talk to her about benefits and severance. And she just burst into tears. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what do I do? Right? I'm 24 years old. And I've got this poor woman sitting there hysterical crying. And she's like, I'm sorry. I said, don't be sorry. Like, this is a massive event. Take the time you need. And the worst part was I had people outside, like, you got to move this along. I'm like, dude, like, what are you doing? Stop. Let her.
These are people. Like,
her process.
Geez.
This is crazy.
So inhumane.
Went through hundreds of those meetings. Then I left that company in 2000 to go to another company in an HR capacity, who also decided to make a shift and do mass layoffs. That one was harder, Mona, and I'll explain why. Because I was working at a Wall Street company that was shifting away from their traditional investment businesses and moving to the parent company, which was on the insurance side. So here I am meeting with people who had been at the company their entire careers. One person who was in operations as a leader, 29 years, was hired in 1972, looked at me and said, what am I going to do next? And here I am now 27 saying, uh, 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 and that was really like my first experience with ageism, because here I am, these people being told as a part of a generation, whether it was baby boomer, Gen X, whatever, that work for the company will always take care of you. And now they're being tapped on the shoulder, being sent back into the workforce, and they have no idea what's next. So for me, it hit me at an early age where seeing people being loyal to one company and then quote unquote rewarded by being shown the door was such an eye-opening experience for me at an early age, and in a negative way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you got a window into what was going to be the trend to come, right? Like here we are, the corporate career's dead. Like no one can go and spend 30 years at one company. I mean, that's a beautiful story, but it is a figment of our imagination at this point. And you saw it coming. And, like you said, when you're thrust out into the working, into the job search, I should say, at an age where you've been at one company for 30 years, like no one would know how to approach the job search. And I think, we've all, I think, gotten to the point where we recognize that we need to kind of always be looking, always be open. Like everybody's kind of open to work all the time, right? Like because you just don't know what's going to happen. And, I'm sure also what probably impacted you at an early age there in your career was seeing that these people, a lot of them, like you said, they were loyal, they were
Right.
hardworking, they did a good job, and yet this is the outcome. Like we don't have that much control, right?
Right.
And oof,
And then
rough lesson.
the other thing too is we don't have the context that we have now as parents, as people that have households that we support other humans. When you're 27, 28 years old, you're thinking, wow, they're giving them 18 months of severance and 12 months of Cobra.
Sounds
And
great.
you realize like now, oh my God, like after taxes, and if it takes you a year to find a job, you're now paying out of pocket for basic medical. And it's just, you don't think of these things at an early age when you're not in the thick of it. But it really just hit me now and looking back saying, my God, these poor people, I hope they were able to transition into something where they could continue their careers in some capacity. But for a lot of these people, I knew a lot of people on Wall Street who ended up having to leave and do different things because they needed to continue to support their families. And I think it's just a cautionary tale, like you had said earlier, Mo, of always be looking. You always have to, sharpen your skill set. You always have to make sure that you have transferable skills that can take you from one career to another. And this experience is what really propelled me to go into compliance in 2004, because I was on the HR side. I just didn't like it from my personality. I'm very outgoing. I'm very optimistic. And to have to live in that world where, you have to cut 20 or 30% of your force at any given stage, just not, aligned with what I enjoyed. Compliance, on the other hand, more rules-based. It's something that is something that companies need. And I saw a shift in compliance, like I saw a shift in HR back, in the 90s, where this is now becoming a career. It used to be, the office manager, whomever was just handling it. And now it was becoming a separate career track. So I'm glad I transitioned when I did. But again, that experience to me in HR really helped build a foundation, because it opened my eyes to how the corporate world really worked. And it was just scary to see, at a young age.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I can imagine. That would be extremely difficult. I also want to ask you this question because, a lot of this audience, of course, is over 40 and they're looking for jobs. And one of the things that my guests routinely tell me and people in the audience routinely tell me, which makes so much sense, is that when they go to a job interview that they're actually able to land, right? And they see someone sitting across from them who's 24, 25, 26, they're immediately like, holy crap, I have no shot at this job. And so I want you to walk us back in your days and talk to us about what it was like being 24, 25, 26 as a recruiter and seeing someone markedly older than you who could maybe even be your dad, maybe be
Right.
your grandpa, maybe be your mom. What was that like honestly?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And being honest, you're starting to think like, where's the commonality, right? And also too, when you're 24, you're like, oh, you're 50. Like, why do you still want to work? And honestly, like back then, like
Yeah,
you don't think of these
totally.
things. And now you realize as you get older, you're like, oh, I always now laugh at people who, who like, if God forbid they're impacted in a layoff, they're in their late 50s, and someone says to them, hey, now you can retire early. I'm like, dude, I'm 10 years away from Medicare. I said, kids that are going to college, like, what are you talking about? Right. So
Exactly.
I think for me, I lack the perspective that I had now. And really what I tried to focus on was, do they have the skills? Do they have the experience to do the job? And, for the more senior jobs, I'm just, giving my input based on my limited experience
Hmm.
and passing it on to someone who is better equipped to make a decision that has more experience than me, at least on the business side. But yeah, it was definitely interesting being in that hiring seat at an early age, just because of the fact that you're trying to look for commonality. And a lot of
Hmm.
times with older workers, it's like, oh, you could be like my dad or my mom. And now you realize like, shit, this is me.
Yeah.
And I'm talking to the 25-year-old recruiter and
Right.
I'm just trying to be like, hey, like what's your TikTok handle? And now it's just like things
Right.
like that where you're trying to look for that common theme
Hmm.
and it's just it definitely
Grasping
gives you
for
perspective.
straws.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
totally. Well, and it's funny because what you're saying also indicates the need for interview training. And when
Totally.
I have been in corporate roles, people have been like, hey, cool, whether I'm a hiring manager or I'm just someone on the loop, they're like, hey, Mo, like you're going to interview this person for this new job. So go get them, Tiger. And there's absolutely no rubric, there's no training, there's no guidance. And it's like, I don't know what I'm just going on my gut. And what could go wrong when you go on your gut? So, I mean, you don't set people up for success in these interviewing loops. And it means that you could get like absolutely terrible candidates through because people are going on their gut or they're asking the wrong questions. They're like, tell me about yourself, whatever the bad questions are. And so you probably 24, 25, you probably had very little in terms of
Exactly.
guidance on how to navigate that and like all the things that could come up. Do you think you were aware of the bias that you held against other people at that moment?
Definitely not. I mean, there is way more emphasis now
Right.
than there was back then. I mean, we probably, I think the extent of the training was you can't ask personal questions
Mhm.
about either their demographics or their age or like things like that. But you don't think about it now. And my company and my previous company put so much emphasis on specific interviewing training. They make it a
Mm,
requirement to do because
good.
there is unintentional bias that's out there and you don't think about it and then when you go through scenarios, you're like, oh, wow, hadn't really thought of it this way. It
Right.
really is eye opening. So, companies, I think, at least the ones that I've worked for, are far more attuned to this now. And they're really putting an emphasis that anyone who's facing candidates is required to go through this training. And I
That's
think,
great.
the results, at least of my previous company and now, have been positive.
That's awesome. I mean, I know I would have really benefited from that back in my corporate jobs. Like, I was just kind of flying.
100%.
I'm like, I got this, I can do it. But, I'm sure I made some mistakes along the way too. Although I remember distinctly being a part of one interview loop. And I was interviewing this guy who was going to come and kind of bring our channel partner program to the next level. And he was so skilled. He was so accomplished. And he was definitely like at least 10 years older than I and everybody else on the team was. And I was the only one who wanted him. I was like, he has the exact experience that we need. Everybody else wanted a guy who was our age and like you'd go grab a beer with after work or whatever. And it's like, so I recognized at that point, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what this is. It's like the confirmation bias of like people like us. It's the culture fit thing where you just get kind of the same type of person that can be so damaging. So I'm happy that you've landed at some organizations that get that you need to train people on how to have good interviews and that it's paid off for you guys in terms of who you've landed.
No,
That's huge.
absolutely. It's definitely been a good experience, especially the training and thinking about the different types of biases that are out there. It's definitely, worthwhile for all companies to look into this because we've definitely benefited.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you kind of got at this a little bit in our past discussion here, but I want to talk about people's prime earning years because those are a thing. And we need to figure out how to maximize them. I think there's a disparity between a woman's prime earning years and a man's. Some of that is because of having kids and all that and, being out of the workforce for a while. But I want to hear your perspective on that because I think people have this sort of notion that like everybody else gets older, but I don't, right? And then suddenly it
Yeah,
hits you and you're
totally.
like, oh shit, like, oh my gosh, like, oh, did I miss my window of prime? Like, what's going on? So talk to me about that.
So this is my take, and everyone's got different opinions. I think your prime earning years are between 35 and 55, right? Because those are the years that if you look at you and I as an examples, right? We're married, kids, buying houses, and now all of a sudden it's like, okay, cool. With the next jump, I'm getting a higher role, and I'm getting more salary and more equity and more bonus and so on and so forth. And with that And what you realize is like, oh my God, my expenses are also going up with this, right?
Add
And
more, spend more.
like I've been very fortunate to live where I've lived, and my wife and I have been together now for 21 years, and we lived in Hoboken, New Jersey for a long time. We now live in suburban New Jersey in a nice house in a nice town, good school district, the whole thing. But you look around, Mo, and there is a balance between my earnings and like what is my spend. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think it's something that people have a really hard time managing simply because of the fact that it's easy to get caught up with the Joneses, right? You're in the
Mm-hmm.
nice town, everyone's at the country club. They either drive a combination of Land Rover, Tesla, BMW, or Mercedes, right? And then you're like, oh my God, so that's $1,000 a month for the payment with the
Mm-hmm.
insurance. The country club's 1,500 a month. Oh, and by the way, like I'm not going to do my own lawn, so I'll hire a landscaper, and I'm not going to go ahead and skim the pool. I'll have a pool guy for that. And then you realize like the 3,500 square foot house like costs a lot to heat and cool. But that's really the challenge, is that you have to balance those prime earning years and also like, are you investing? Are you saving? Like, what are you doing with that? And I like to use the term, you may not have heard this before, but I like to call them Jenga families, where the people have all of the things that I've talked about, the 5,000 square foot house, the BMW, they have the country club membership, and it looks like they're on top of the world. But one person is the earner and like the other person is the stay at home parent. And think of it like the game of Jenga. If one block is removed, i.e. a job loss or something, drastic, the whole thing comes crashing down. And I think I know way too many people like that. And for me, I've always tried to balance like, hey, I want to maximize my earning years, but in order for this to really work, I have to be smart with my money, right? And I think a lot of times people tend to go for the gusto because I've made it, I make all this money, I have this fancy title. People expect me to keep up. So it's something where you have to have that windfall because Armageddon at some point will come, right? And I've talked to people about this. It's great. I've talked to like a lot of former Wall Street brokers who worked on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. The really smart ones, Mo, planned for Armageddon. They knew that it would come to an end. So the ones who, had the same house for 30 years and didn't belong to the country club and drove the Chevy Impala were the ones that were ready for retirement. It was the ones that spent more than they made, that when Armageddon happened, it was the end of the world.
100%. And I think I actually saw a kind of funny post about this recently. The comedian Austin Nasso, who does the Tech Roast Show, he did this post on LinkedIn that was satirical. He was like, here's how I, as a single earner in San Francisco, can't get by on $340,000 a year. And it was
He's
like,
the dude with the Cybertruck, right? Like the
yes, the Cybertruck. Oh my gosh, it was amazing. So many people, though, they didn't understand he was kidding. And they were like,
Oh
this
my
is
God.
terrible. You should be safe. It's like, oh my God. But that was hilarious. But to your point, people do have this sort of keep up with the Joneses mentality. I think it's funny because I feel like I was much more wired that way as a younger person earlier in my career. And now as I'm older, I care about things like that far less. But I think you get, even if you don't care about that stuff, like you still get locked in. Like you're locked into, if you're fortunate enough to buy a home, which sadly is on the decline for many of us here in this millennial and below realm. But if you're lucky enough to buy a home, you're locked in. You got a mortgage. It's like expensive to move. And so you're kind of stuck there. You're in a community, your kids are in a school or whatever. And so you kind of get baked in. And so what's been interesting to see as well, in my view, is like a lot of these people who get laid off in tech specifically, especially, I would say, I've seen like really, really nasty comments online about people who are like, oh, well, I don't care about the tech bros because they have all this money or whatever. The people who lost their jobs. And it's like, hey, they have expenses that were aligned with their current salary at one point. And I'm sorry, Americans just tend not to be very good at like taking care of this kind of stuff. They kind of have this like, I'll figure it out later, kick the can down the road thing. We're human, right? And so, and to this point as well, we don't like see ourselves getting older. Like we're constantly feeling like we're younger than we are. And the data doesn't lie about this, right? Like if you lose your job in your 50s, it most likely wasn't your choice and you are going to take twice as long to find a job as you did when you were younger, and you're probably not going to find a job that paid you as well as the one that you lost. And that can decimate people's lives. And it's actually something that I don't think gets spoken about nearly enough, because this is like huge societal implications, right? Because it's not just the earner, him or herself, it's their family. It's like it has reverberations. I mean, I was literally at a restaurant recently, and I had this conversation with the waitress. We were chatting about how we both had ADHD. I was learning about her side hustle, and then she asked me what I did, and I told her about this podcast, and she was like, oh my God, my dad has never been the same since he lost his job in his 50s. It tore our whole world apart. I have all these memories. He never regained a sense of confidence again. Like, he had to take these jobs that paid far less, etc. It was like really quite heartbreaking. And that's why part of the reason I get so upset when people suggest that ageism isn't real, because it does have just devastating impacts, not only on those people, but on the society and community around them, right? So I'm really glad that you talked about all that, because that's the reality. People have more, spend more, get embedded in a community, and these costs, they don't go away, right? So
100%. And here's the other thing too. So I was a part of a restructure at my last company. So I left in February, and I'm 50 now, I'm 51. So at my level, right, I'm going for chief compliance officer roles, which are in the New York area. They could be remote, but it's limited. Also, at my comp point where I am in my career, it also limits me, because I know, and you made the point, I know I'm not going to make the same amount of money that I did at my previous company, but what is the absolute floor that I can accept, right? And that's the challenge too. And you have talked about this, and we talk to people about it all the time. I need a job, I need to work. But am I going to take a 40 or 50% pay cut to do it? Absolutely not, right? So then you stay out longer, you keep looking for the right thing. What was fortunate for me, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point, I had met through my network a couple of fintech founders who needed help on the advisory side. So I did that for a couple of months, helped bridge the gap. But the reality is that it took a while. I mean, it was 5 months from the time that I started looking to the time that I started at my new company. And some people will say, well, that's pretty good, but it felt like an eternity, Mo. It felt like a long time, because you realize that where you are in your career, where you are from a price point, and the opportunities that are available are not as much as what you would have found 20 years ago or even 10 years ago.
Yep, 100% accurate. And then if you were to decide, hey, you know what, I got to widen the net here, and I got to cast, my search a little bit more broadly, it's like you're going to get into the situation where you're taking a step down, and people don't look kindly on that. And I'm sure you can tell me from the recruiter point of view, it's like people don't understand. And the reality is, some people might get to a certain place in their career and realize, oh shit, this isn't for me. Like, I don't want to manage people, right? And coming back down that ladder, I think, is very difficult to do.
Right. And I'll add to that point. I completely agree. There are people who have been in leadership roles that are going back to IC, and they're being questioned by people in recruiting and people that they're talking to, potential roles, saying, you were a leader. Why would you want to be an IC? Because I enjoy the work. This is what I'm passionate about. I don't want to deal with the bureaucracy of having to manage people and budgets and make those types of decisions. And for whatever reason, people frown upon it. They're like, are you kidding me? Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? And I view it as a very mature shift in terms of, I know what I'm good at, and I know what I don't want to do. This is where I want to focus.
Amen. And I think that needs to be something that's like taught to people in recruiting and hiring manager positions, because this sort of mentality, I think it's like succeed at all costs, like have ambition, all that, which of course on the flip side doesn't always pan out for women, as we
Absolutely.
should get into.
Right.
And actually, let's use that to shift into the conversation about women. So ageism, of course, impacts everyone. It's like the weird, perverse beauty of this particular form of discrimination and bias, right? So, but I know I want to thank you, because I think a lot of women out there right now are not feeling super great about what's going on in the world, and we need our allies more than ever. And I know that you've been a very vocal advocate for women. And so I just want to open the floor to you to talk a little bit about, what you've perceived, what you've seen, and how you think women can set themselves up for success.
It's definitely harder for women from my perspective, because look, the way that people view gray on men is sophisticated and experienced, and he really has, risen through the ranks. And the
Silver
way that
fox.
gray is viewed upon women, and it is not as favorable.
Mm-mm.
So, I always try and support and advocate for females in leadership. My current company, we have 6 women on our leadership team, and each and every one of them is fantastic. They do a wonderful job, and it's just great to see. But I will say it is difficult, much harder for women because one, you're dealing with the physical aspects of it and the perception of how men age versus how women age. I think that is, especially if you look on social media, I mean, anytime you're on Instagram or whatnot, they are putting the 25-year-old or the 30-year-old, and it's not the older women, right? It's difficult, right? It's very difficult to have to go in and fight and put on the makeup and really look your youngest when
Mm-hmm.
age is saying like, hey, like this is where you're at and accept
Mm-hmm.
it. I think there is such a stigma around women trying to continue in their careers, especially those who have advanced through the ranks and having to deal with, hey, like, well, why can you lead us? And, what can you do? And what are you capable of? And so on and so forth. And it's really going to take people who are founders that are focused on experience and focused on hiring the right people and focused on hiring women to say they have the experience to do this. Let's give them the opportunity. And look, we're seeing it more now with boards, with diversification in terms of, adding females, adding minorities, which is good. And it definitely needs to happen. But I do think, it is much harder for women, given all the reasons that I mentioned. And again, a lot of it has to do with breaking that perception that's out there.
It's so true. And, the thing, there was a headline that was written by a columnist in the New York Times a while ago, Jessica Gross. She wrote a headline that was called The Hour Between Babe and Hag. And I was just like,
Yes,
if that
yes,
doesn't freaking nail it, I don't know what does. Right.
right.
And, you're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're kind of like a try hard if you try to appear younger. And then, of course, there's also this inverse ageism where younger women are being questioned and basically marginalized for not knowing enough. How could you possibly know enough? Because you're a young woman. Right. So it's we do get it from both sides. And I think we should celebrate people aging on their own terms, doing whatever it is the hell they want to do and look the way they want to do. But what is bothersome is that this transfers not just from an industry where it would be very obviously apparent, like Hollywood, even in corporate America. Like I've had guests who will say, like, I actively try to look 10 plus years younger. And I realized like I kind of did it too to try and fit in, right? Like, and it's a really sad reality. And I think we have a long way to go on it. But thank you for acknowledging that it is different for women, because it's also been intriguing to see the response on LinkedIn. Like I had people come in after me. Some guys were like, you're discriminating against men, because I did a post about how ageism hurt women, and I was celebrating Demi Moore. And they're like, you didn't talk about men. And I was like, oh my God, what is happening here? But so thank you. I appreciate
Of
it.
course,
We
absolutely.
need your voice. We need your
No,
voice.
it's definitely harder for sure. And again, I think it's breaking these age-old perceptions of how men age gracefully and how
Yeah.
women decline when they age, and that
Yeah.
needs to, we need to shift the narrative.
So one thing that I like to do with the show is try and show success stories. And I know it probably felt like it was a million years while you were trying to get your next job after your last restructuring, but you did get it. And so can you share with our audience, what do you think you did that set yourself up for success? I mean, especially knowing what you did about how ageism worked from having been in HR.
It's first and foremost networking, right? You tap into your network and you start to think about people and connections with potential opportunities, and also really focusing on, hey, I know this person. I just want to, reach out to them and basically say, look, I'd love to reconnect. And I think what a lot of people are doing now, Mo, and I think it's been really helpful, is just reconnecting with people and hearing kind of like what's out there and, like what might be coming down the pike. I think it's one of those things that you have to budget at a minimum 3 months for your search, especially as, you get older. I think 6 months, maybe even 9 months in some cases could be more realistic, but you have to stay positive. That's the first thing, right? You have to be optimistic. I think part of the challenge And people who are in jobs don't quite understand, especially if they've never been impacted. People don't want to hear, how's the search going? How's the search going? How's the search going? You don't want to be reminded of that. So be mindful with people that you know who are actively looking, especially if they're in between, to really not put any added pressure on them, right? Yeah, their number one goal is to get another job and to land another role. Like, they don't need you to, remind them, like, hey, right.
Yeah, how'd that interview go last week,
Exactly. More of the, what can I do to help? Would you want to meet for coffee? I'd love to take you to lunch. That's the kind of support those people need, right? That's the support that I needed. That was the support that was most helpful to me. So that's really, the first thing. And when you're interviewing for roles, again, networking people that at the company that can put in a good word for you, and really just trying to connect the dots to see, can this person help push it over the line for me if it's like a jump ball? That was, really like the biggest focus for me. And then once, you get that opportunity, just, shine with your experience and say, I can do the role and here's why. And people want to hear, real life examples of what you've done at other companies. So that was certainly helpful. I would also say enhancing your skills and certifications, anything that you can do, like in the HR world or in the compliance world, SHRM is a big one in the HR side, compliance. There are other certifications that you could get, but even taking, certain courses just to refresh, where like you want to take a course on AI, you want to take a course on something where, again, you're trying to balance, like, I don't have $5,000 to pay for this, but there are plenty of these like LinkedIn courses that are free that you can take that can kind of brush things up. It's good just, to helps, keep your time and helps, keep you busy. But anything that you can do to, add something to your resume, add something to your background that is helpful, always look to do that. I would also say in the interim, find ways to diversify your income. So I mentioned earlier, when I was looking, I had an opportunity to do advisory work for a fintech, which I did, and it was great, right? But it was clear that the company didn't need someone at my level just yet. They were in Series A. And I didn't want to come out there and say, well, listen, you need me and here's why. I wanted to act in their best interest and say, look, I don't think you need me. I can help you find someone. And actually, I helped them find someone who actually worked for me at my previous company. So it worked out great. But that being said, having an advisory opportunity where you could work 10 or 20 hours a week, help bring in some income and just help, sharpen your skills. Again, it's not something that like it landed for me relatively quick, but it was through networking.
Mm-hmm.
There are opportunities, and Mo, you're going to see more of this. The market for fractional has skyrocketed,
blowing up,
because companies, especially when they're pre-seed, seed, and A, they don't need a full-time COO. They don't need a full-time, CFO. They don't need a full-time CRO. They need someone who can do fractional. And if that fractional can help build you into a potential full-time role, great. But be open to the fractional. And I think that will also help.
Excellent advice. I mean, the tides are turning. Like, we see this. Like, people are going to need to adapt to the market, whether you like it or not. I mean, it's as you get older, the system as it is today, it doesn't necessarily help you that you're older unless you are then going into consulting or advisory or fractional work, because then your age is an asset, right? And so it's an unfortunate situation. I think it will shift, but for now, I think the people who are going to land things more quickly are going to be open to that and are going to hang a shingle on their own, saying, "Hey, I'll do this." And to your point, like, your network gets way larger the longer you work. So age is an asset in that regard too, and your network also expands if you're using LinkedIn. Your network is friends of friends. It's connections of connections. It's like, it's huge. So don't underestimate that. And I love that you leveraged all those tools to land your job and that you got there. I mean, given like the data, like fairly quickly. I know it felt like freaking forever, especially when people are like, "Hey, Passarelli, how was that job interview last week?" And you're like, "Fuck, right. I don't want to talk about it." Like,
Exactly. And people, again, don't need to be reminded of it. And the one last point I'll make on fractional is there is more of consortiums of consultants getting together and helping each other, where if I'm a fractional CFO, I know a fractional COO, I know a fractional CRO.
Yeah.
They can make introductions to one another, like, "Hey, I've got this 10-hour-a-week fractional job. They're looking for a CFO. Would you be interested?"
Brilliant.
So really just networking together and those strategic partnerships are also going to help open up doors.
Totally huge. Totally huge. You know, I want to leave on a very fun note. And that
Yes.
is, I think we originally found one another because you saw that Corporate Bro was on my show.
Love him.
I
Love
love him
him.
so much.
Love
That
him.
was so epic. And so I think that's how we were originally connected. But since then, I know you and I like have been sharing back memes and funny videos and whatnot of our favorite content creators who are helping us laugh so we don't cry about like the state of corporate today. So can you share some of your other favorites with this audience? Because people need a laugh now more than ever.
So Ross Pomerantz, Corporate Bro, is like my favorite. I found him on Instagram. That's where I started sending you the different memes. I just followed him on LinkedIn. In fact, I just sent him a connect request and I dropped your name. I said, we have a common, friend. Please add me, right? So I'm totally like starstruck right now.
Fingers crossed.
Hoping I'm worthy. And I know he
You are.
teams up with Corporate Natalie. She's great too.
She's awesome.
So the two of them are just fantastic. I just love the parodies and the way that they make
So
fun. Like
good.
Ross did something with like medieval times and, how they like did sales quotas and they use all of these like references from like the 1600s and it's hilarious. It's just so
funny.
great and how innovative they are. Another person I like, and I don't know if you follow Ben Sweeney, but it's Corporate Sweeney.
I do. Love
Ben,
him.
he's so good. He is one of these guys that like he takes a dark side approach to it. And, like he just did one on DEI that I shared with you, right? And here he is in 2020. He's like, DEI, we're going to hire this person and we're going to really focus on this and we're going to really focus on that. And then it flips to 2025. Yeah, we're scrapping the whole thing. Jane and Sarah are gone. And basically that's it. Thank you, Bob. And it's just like so great how, he takes these situations and he turns it and you're like, oh my God, he's so believable in this role.
Yeah,
that
as this like CEO.
He's just like the corporate douche that you just loathe.
Can't
and he
stand.
plays the villain so well. And the other one that we both love is Humorous Resource.
Oh, Jamie Jackson.
Yep. You turned me on to that one. Fantastic. I just love the parodies on HR. But overall, like I said, I love that people are turning this and making it into meaningful content. It just lightens everything up.
It does. And don't we just need that to get by? Right?
Totally.
I mean,
Totally.
This is hard enough. So let's have some laughter. So I'm glad that you two find comfort in that. And I'm hopeful I will link the names of those people or the @ handle things in here so that people can go and follow them too, so they can have a little levity, as well as your handle. Nick, if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, send memes to you, where can I send them?
Great question. I'll include my LinkedIn profile. So it's interesting. Like you and I are on Instagram together. I'm a little church and state when it comes to my Instagram. So like it's a friends thing. I don't actually have work colleagues on my Instagram.
Fair.
I believe.
Good call.
So that's another great point. Never add your work friends onto your socials because they could totally use that against you. I learned this through a friend at Brex at my old company, and I thought it was brilliant. And it's like, yeah, it's smart because you just never know if someone's looking to get a competitive edge on you. You might think they're your friend, but man, they could turn it on you quickly.
So true. So true. It's rough out there, boys and girls. Be careful.
Totally.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Nick. I could talk to you for hours and I can't wait to see you again next time I'm in New York.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for having me.